Good afternoon out there, everybody. This is Tammy from Texas Desert Rose here, broadcasting from Korea. And been doing a lot of watching of television and research and stuff. And that's a little bit what the topic's going to be about today because I am on the tail end of a 7-day quarantine. And this is what happens: too much time. So, as I've mentioned before, some of you may know, some of you may not, that I'm a licensed professional counselor out of the state of Texas. And we're going to talk a little bit about stress, anxiety, depression today. And while I am in no way trying to play doctor, some of the statistics that I'm going to be quoting comes from WebMD. Take a look. Their site is very, it seems like pretty effective, efficient. They know what they're doing. And I've had, I've been a licensed therapist practicing since 1998. And so I've got a little bit of experience under my belt as well with mental and emotional disorders. Doesn't have to be a disorder, life. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this today because I want to, overused word, normalize talking about emotions, talking about the effects on the emotions. You don't have to have a broken bone in order to get help. And my goal is to get more information out there. And if you need help in finding somebody as a licensed therapist, while I am licensed out of Texas, I do have connections because of the work I do with the military as a contractor. I have a lot of connections to other therapists in different states. Ultimately, the licensure board, for the most part, says that wherever you reside, you need to have a therapist licensed in that state. And so, for example, I can see people who reside in Texas, even if I'm not in Texas. So anyway, please shoot me a message and please subscribe, because what that does is helps me get the word out there to more people, okay? So let's talk about stuff that you guys hear about all the time. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about specific characteristics of anxiety and depression and what I've seen across the board in my practice, okay? For one thing, won't be a surprise at all that financial stress has increased since 2015. What is that? 7 years? 6.5? Financial stress has increased 69%. You guys, 69%. That's not a surprise to you guys living in the US, and we get a touch of it here too, because whatever prices you have there in the US, we also have it here on base across the board. Fuel is more expensive usually overseas because it's priced per quart instead of, per pint instead of gallon. But either way, more is more. We're not making more money, but we're having to spend more money. And so that financial stress, if it wasn't already stressed out, and it was for many, it's increased 69%. That is incredible for 6.5 years. And we've had so much happen. I don't have to tell you, was it January 2020 is when I was in the Middle East working, very aware of, some of the stresses over in the Middle East there. That affects fuel, affects prices. And within 2 months, or maybe 3 months, America went into the effects of pandemic, lagging a little bit behind where I was, but definitely. Anyway, I'm not going to state the obvious. You guys are living it, So a couple of, what is it? Toward 2022. So a couple of years of turmoil. And there were things going on before that, but it just seems like to me that it's like whack-a-mole. You whack one thing and get it solved and something else pops up, and usually it doesn't get solved before the next thing pops up. So top reasons for increased stress, especially financially, would be, of course, gas prices, grocery prices. Oh my goodness, I haven't even been in the U.S. I can't imagine what it's like there to even buy vegetables or fruits here. Um, I wouldn't touch a lot of them. I just buy frozen because they're so expensive, $6 and $7 for a small thing of blueberries, and I don't even know what it is in the U.S. I'm going to find out when I come home, but um, inflation has increased 87%. Now we're not talking small amounts, people. We're not talking 20, 30%. We're talking 87%. No wonder stress is up 70. Um, we've got the Russian retaliation, as we're all powerfully aware. Americans, 63% of Americans have said that the pandemic has changed their life forever. Forever. So, and I would imagine that that is towards a negative slant. Some people have had their lives changed in a positive way because of increased time, possibly at home, quality time with family, a reorganization of priorities. For example, statistics show that the biggest changes in someone's life, they make it after a 7-day vacation. A 7-day vacation, we make huge decisions because once we go back into our lives, we re-feel it in a different way. And so if 7 days can make you make huge decisions, I can't imagine after many being at home and not being in their lives for a while and then having to step back in. Some of us haven't stepped back in. Some have decided, no, I'm not stepping back in. Some want to and can't. I mean, across the board, everybody's been affected in different ways. And some, a small percentage, I think, probably in a positive. And every one of us would probably choose at least some positive that's come out of the pandemic. But there's a lot of grief. I don't have to tell you, there's a lot of grief across the board with people grieving what we think could have been, grieving what never got to happen. Ask parents who have had kiddos that didn't get to attend homecomings, football games, proms, graduation, or got to attend with very few people. Those that have lost loved ones. I'm one of them to COVID. And we never, ever, well, I should keep it in me. I never expected for life to be so different, Not getting to see one particular loved one because of COVID between the country that they're in, the country I'm in, and then switching countries and the lockdowns, haven't seen them in 2.5 years. And that's a real test, I'll tell you, of how much connection is there whenever you haven't seen each other in 2.5 years, and to keep that alive, So I have worked in the last 2 years at a child development center, which is the young age on a military base, young up to age 5 or so. And I've also worked a middle school, which is anywhere from 11 years old to 14 years old. And I can tell you the impact has definitely been felt. It's definitely been felt. I'll say more about that, but what we found over time also as a form of coping, out of boredom, out of loneliness, I didn't think I could ever say that I was bored, but after, I think totally, I've done quarantine now for a total, because of switching countries and things like that, a total of five weeks, not straight together, but first time was 10 days, and then 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and then a week. Is that 5? Week, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and a week. There it is. So, and boy, talk about a challenge of how to keep oneself busy. Try to keep the body moving if you can. I mean, I notice that my joints get really, really sore from sitting all the time. So, and I've noticed the cravings, in general, we don't crave for salad, right? Or even protein. A lot of the cravings tend to be sugar, alcohol, which is a majority. I mean, that's your sugar. Um, Simple carbs, sugar. When people say I don't eat sugar, well, unless you're living on protein alone and fat, you're eating carbs. But that's not a bad thing. There is not one thing that's bad for you, but when you crave and your body's not moving, you can imagine we've got more stress that is involved in that as well. And so we've got another pandemic on its way, right? Um, so let me just say, let me talk about anxiety a little bit. I mentioned that children and adolescents that have really seen it working, in the schools and the child development centers and with adults as well. But what I didn't expect, and this wasn't country specific, it wasn't base specific, it wasn't age specific, because I've worked in 2 countries in the last 2 years. I've worked every age and 2 very different cultures. And so we can't say it's about either of that. But what I saw across the board is young children, when they're feeling depressed or anxious, they do their opposite. Children are, they love to go play, they love to connect to each other. But what you'll see in your child is a more of a clinginess to you, a not wanting to go connect to anybody, just kind of checking out, even video games, even young ages. With middle school, what is that age? Age 11 to 14. What do they normally do? And I think this applies to high school as well. What do they normally do? They connect to their friends. That is their normal. Well, when they're in anxiety and depression, what you're going to see is them pulling away from their friends, pulling away from you. But that's what they're supposed to be doing. That's part of their development, is to pull away and connect to friends. But when there's anxiety and depression, what they're doing is pulling into themselves. You're going to see a lot of video game playing if you have them in the home, and having to fight that battle. That is actually helping the brain in some ways to cope with these emotions. Too much of anything isn't good, right? So keeping like some kind of structure with that, parents, would be a good idea. But you're going to have a battle on your hands. I had very extroverted, outgoing adolescents refusing to leave the house. Now, this is when they were on lockdown and not in school. Okay, this was Middle East. It was also here in Korea. They, for the first time, the parents would report a total personality shift where they just want to be on their own. They may connect to friends, they may not, but they don't want to go out. And with many, a secondary, pretty severe anxiety disorder developed. Extreme OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, obsessiveness, I forget the name of the diagnosis, but with looks, even down to worried about their being judged by their arm hair. Now, some of that's the age, okay? That is part of the age, but this was to the extremes where when the definition of disorder is if it impacts your life, it impacts your quality of life, then we need to look at this. And we're going to look at more of those characteristics as well. So 87% of Americans report feeling overwhelmed and fatigued. And you guys, if you see me looking over, I've got my notes. Want to make sure I cover everything, okay? 70% fear impending war. Well, especially recently. I mean, I'm half a step away from Russia. And there's definitely been an increase in some of the stuff going out and the sounds at night. One would be oblivious not to pay attention to it. But guys, let me tell you, and if I'm sitting here right in the middle of it and saying this, then maybe you should give it some consideration. Try to put some boundaries on your watching news, the social media. It's everywhere. the research and studies show that the impact on depression and anxiety, particularly anxiety, if you're watching news, is compounded. Okay? I've sitting here now 7 days, and I have made a conscious choice to not watch the news. Now, that is not the answer for everybody, but put a limit on it. Because what it does is it changes, there are synapses in the brain, and what it does is it gets those negative and fearful synapses to clicking. You know, I don't know if you've really thought about that, but the brain, if, you know, that whole idea of envisioning, visualizing, manifesting, seeing the positive, it sounds hokey, but it's true. If you watch positive things, like I was noticing that I was watching a lot of crime shows and stuff, and it was heavy, intense, and so I thought, you know what, I need to watch something that's going to kind of counterbalance this, because that does have an impact on a psyche. And you've got a therapist saying this, okay? So I have worked with the mind and the psyche for quite some time, and I know the impact it can have. And besides, if I'm wrong, you're no worse off. Just put a boundary on it. And I'm not saying never to watch it. Some people would be like, no way, I have to know what's going on. That's okay. Just kind of counterbalance it with some comedy, with some lighter things, with some humanitarian stuff. Has really been really great to watch for me. So let's see. Let's talk about some of the characteristics of this said anxiety, since we've mentioned it. Because I want to destigmatize mental, that we can't ever talk out loud and say out loud vulnerably that we feel sad. Now, the word depression's thrown about too easily. The kids say it that I work at, the school I work at, they say it all the time, I'm depressed. Well, is it possible that you're sad? I'm anxious. Okay, let's talk about that anxiety. So stating these emotions out loud, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm scared. I'd love to normalize that. I have to catch my own self with it, because it's easier for me to feel anger than for me to feel fear, or for me to feel sadness, particularly sadness. Because anger is a secondary emotion, is usually covering those other emotions, okay? So, set some boundaries as far as watching the news, like I said. Start to notice what your emotions are. State these out loud. If not out loud, state them to yourself. Okay? Try to keep some structure on your kids, your teens regarding the video games, but I would by no means cut them off of them, because it can offer some soothing for the brain as well. Structure and limit what kind of some of the things that you're eating, you know, as best you can. I'm not saying you got to go vegan or something like that. I'm saying that just maybe with some boundaries. Boundaries are the key. Too much of anything ain't good, as my mama used to say. Okay, so characteristics of anxiety. And in the diagnostic manual, if you have 5 of these, a minimum of 5 of these for at least 2 weeks, then I want to encourage you to reach out and try to get some support and some help. And I'm offering that as well. Here's a reminder. Sorry guys, that's my Alexa. Characteristics of anxiety. A general feeling of nervousness and anxiety, okay, like a kind of a shakiness, and you may or may not know what's provoking this, what's causing it, just an overwhelming feeling, or maybe an underwhelming feeling of impending doom. That's the second one. First, nervous and anxious. 2, a feeling of impending danger or doom with not a specific cause. Because if you know the specific cause, that would be appropriate anxiety and fear, right? Third, increased heart rate, again, with little or no provocation that you know of. That doesn't mean if you just got through doing, hauling groceries inside and your your heart rate's high. Don't worry, that's appropriate. Actually, um, that also goes for the next one, which is rapid breathing. Maybe a feeling of trembling. I've got a kiddo that I see who feels like a sense of trembling almost all the time. Sometimes I can see it and sometimes I can't. She did not notice that it was sometimes visible, but that is part of an anxiety disorder. Um, a feeling of weakness and tired. Um, when I was going through one of my toughest times, I would be exhausted by 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning because anxiety is exhausting. It's the unconscious mind, which is 99% of your mind, is feeling these things and has this impending doom and fear. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of energy. So, and then a very important one, can't concentrate. Like if you're doing what I call tangential, where your mind's just all over the place on a regular basis. And again, if you feel minimum of 5 of these characteristics for at least 2 weeks, reach out, shoot me a message. We can try to get you connected with a therapist. Some towns, like the one I'm from, has universities that have sliding scale counseling. So don't think you have to have insurance or be rich in order to get counseling. I'll do my very best to try to find somebody that you can get support from. Okay. Now let's talk about depression. Again, an overused word. I'm depressed. That is possibly true, but likely it is feelings of sadness and even unexpressed anger that has not been worked through. It can result in depression as well. So, characteristics of depression, minimum of 5. A feeling of hopelessness, feeling of helplessness, like your hands are tied, you're powerless. Again, that impending doom, that feeling of something is about to happen. I'm not sure what, but I can just feel it coming. A loss of interest in friendships. That is something that was a real big red flag and quite common with some of my teens. A kiddo came in and told me, when I say kiddo, all ages, I call them kiddos, but came in and said, I just don't really get excited about seeing any of my friends or going and meeting them anymore. That's a real big clue. Loss of interest in friendships and sex. Going to work, which may be work related, it may not be, and even seeing family, hanging out with family. Number 5, fatigue, difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking before you're ready to. On a regular basis. Maybe a sleep study is needed. Maybe, a lot of that can be solved by having your hormones checked. Don't let me forget to mention that, please. If you have not, it's worth having your hormones checked, especially if you're having sleep issues. It could be some real big, some stuff going on with your testosterone or one of the other hormones. A feeling of anxiousness can be a sign of depression. I know this is confusing, but you don't have to figure it out. Minimum of 5 for at least 2 weeks, and you go to the doctor and they'll figure it out, okay? They have assessments that they can do on you to help you out with that. Irritability. And I don't mean I've had a bad day, leave me alone, I need my space. I'm talking irritability in general, just an overall about life, okay? Change in appetite. And that's either increased or decreased. Or weight changes. Now you could have gained weight, lost weight, but your appetite hasn't changed. And you could have stayed the same weight, but your appetite has changed. So those are separate, and either one could be characteristics. So, Uncontrolled emotions, like you feel like you want to, if you find yourself, this is a really big key. I had a client that did this, staying away from anybody because you don't feel like you can trust your emotions. And a lot of times people don't realize they're doing that. They're just staying away and they're like, people are driving me crazy. They're on my last nerve. Well, the way I knew I needed to go get my hormones checked was because everybody was on my last nerve. And so if you find yourself holding yourself back and not connecting to people because of fear of this, fear of your own mood and your irritability, then that might be something worth checking into. You know, have some compassion for yourself. That's something that needs, you shouldn't be feeling this way. As I told a 14-year-old, you're way too young to be this damn old, you know? Focus on death, particularly in adolescent years, but really this could be overall. And I don't mean like a curiosity, I mean like almost an obsession about death. Now, having worked with many clients who've had suicidal ideation, I can't tell you one that really wanted to die. They just were exhausted with living. And let me tell you, regardless of your age, there is help. There is help. If you don't believe what I'm saying, don't trust your thinking. You've got depressed thinking. You've got possibly suicidal thoughts, overwhelm, exhaustion. Don't trust your thinking. Please, I've been there. I understand. And there is help. Reach out. Okay? And pretty much that is the main things that I wanted to cover. I wanted you to have an idea if, you know, you have some anxiety or depression that you need to be concerned about. We definitely have the stress going on. And if you don't feel like a therapist is the way, and I'm not by any means saying it's the only way, it is a very effective way, but reach out, because when you're depressed or anxious, you may tell yourself, nobody wants to hear from me anyway. Nobody cares about me. But guess what? That's depressed or anxious thinking. Usually people, they get very busy. They've got their own stuff. They may have the same thinking that you do, so they don't reach out. But very rarely is someone not happy to hear from you. Please reach out. If nothing else, send me a message. Let's get you the help that you need, okay? Blessings, and I will see you for the next recording. Bye.